Well, that just happens to be a chipmunk. Can you see him? Younger brother to the squirrel. He is checking out that frog. And that's what we're going to do today. Take a closer look at frogs on the ETR. Well, we are at the ETR this morning, and we're going to do a little video, you and I, on switches and frogs. There's a lot of wildlife here on the ETR. We've seen it. Deers, turtle, chipmunk. But this morning we're going to talk about frogs. Now these are the tools that we've got laid out to do it with. We're going to get the date off the rail. That's what these items are for. That's a McDonald's coffee. We'll try that out this morning. And then we're going to look at switches and frogs. Well, this is in need of repair. So the switch is made up of many points and parts and movements. The two inside rails, which are called switch point, both move. Now when you're coming down the track, what you want to think about is that your flanges should always be on the inside. So if you want to go straight down this rail, down to South Point, and you're coming up to this, then you're thinking about your flange being on the inside of this and the inside of this rail. So you would go straight. If you see a problem with that, or that's not what you wanted, then these switch points have been moved and you'll go around the corner. Now, as I look at the maintenance problems here, I don't know why those two nuts are missing, but in this scenario, this rod coming from the switch stand would move that switch point, but not this one, because they're disconnected now. So there is definitely some maintenance going to have to go on there. And of course the switch then leads to the frog. Now the frog is where the rails actually cross over each other. And in this design, there really are no moving parts. Now there are many parts, but there are no moving parts. So this is where the flange, being on the inside of this rail, which has just come from Death Valley, you're going to come all the way through here. You want the flange to remain going directly on this side of the rail to go south. If you were going into Canada too, you would be coming on this rail and you would want the flange to run right through there on around Canada too. And that's what the frog does. It's the crossover. Now, we talked about this the other day. This is called a guardrail or a guide rail. You'll notice you actually encounter the guide rail before you get to the frog. So as your wheel set comes down through here, if this were out of gauge wide, which could happen because of bad ties, which we see, then your wheel set could be a little bit too far that way, meaning the flange would make contact here and it would force the wheel back over that way, which is exactly what you want. Because if the flange is running right in here, then on this side, the flange is running right about here. If not for that guardrail there, the wheel set could come this way, and this flange could possibly get on this side of this point. Now this is called the frog point. One of the guys in the comments talked about how the guardrail, guide rail was to keep from beating up the frog point, which is absolutely true. But the worst thing that happens is if the flange gets on this side, let's say it hits, bounces a little bit, comes down on this side, then over there without the guardrail, the guide rail, there is nothing to keep the car, the locomotive on the tracks here. That wheel is going to track that way. This one is going to come off on the ground and you've got a derailment right here. So that's the role of the guide rail, guardrail in the frog and what's going on at the exact point, When you get to right here, it's forced the axle that way so that the flange runs in the right spot. Now this frog is made up of components: wing rail, replaceable manganese pieces, and a lot of bolts bolted together. But you know, there are frogs that are made in one piece. So let's take a walk and see what we find. Boy, there we found a really bad tie. This, of course, is in halfway yard where the ties are the worst. Now there is one frog that doesn't have guardrails or guide rails, and that is a frog with a movable point. So if that last 1.5 feet of that frog point could click over to here, then the wheel set coming from Death Valley running down through here, the flange could not get over into this groove, flange way. It would be locked into this one because this point had flipped over like that. See how that would work? So in the case of a frog with a movable point, you wouldn't need guardrail or guide rail. This is all the same rail. Here's a spot where I've prepared it for you guys to be able to read. So we've got 10002 Sydney VT 100 pounds ARA-1 1975. Now, this, I believe, was rolled in Nova Scotia, and the VT, I think, stands for one of the processes that was used in rolling the rail, the year 1975, and that's pretty consistent throughout the ETR. And by the way, there's hash marks at the end, which I think indicates the month. It looks like there is 5 of them. Yep, there's 5 over there. January, February, March, April, May. May of 1975. Well, I've enjoyed having you along for the track inspection. Of course, later we'll have to do the work, but today we did the easy part, had a coffee, and really enjoyed it. A lot to learn. I've got a lot to learn, people. I never claimed I was an expert. I just claimed I'm the one with the big mouth and the camera. So Peter Cruikshank and the safety committee are off doing some kind of little training or something. So while they're gone, I'm going to see if I can get that switch stand onto the back of the truck. We're going to take that and do a little bit of a rebuild on it, open it up, see what's inside, clean and lubricate and check it. We'll take it to the shop to do that. There's no equipment here, so I'm going to see if I can get that up onto the back of the 550. Oh, I don't think I'm going to put that in the video. Well, this is the switch stand, the candidate number 2. That's right where it sat. Of course, it moves that rod, moves the switch points. But we're going to take this back to the shop, open it up, see what's inside, clean, lubricate, of course, paint the flag. Have to tie it down before we drive away. Well, the ETR is just such a great classroom. And you know, I don't know where all this ends, but I do know we're learning together. And right up there, we looked at a manganese frog that had components all bolted together. The wing rail, the wear pieces, constructed in a way that you could replace pieces by unbolting and removing the parts that you wanted to change. But you know, I was talking about the ETR being such a great classroom. Let's look and see what else we can find here. And here's another frog coming up. This is the frog on the bakery curve. And wouldn't you know, looky here what we found. This is a one-piece manganese frog. So as we were talking about ones that had wear components, this one is one solid piece from here to there. Now I don't have a tape measure in my pocket. I should, but I don't. But that's 9 feet long, solid. So in this case, you would have less time and effort assembling it, but if you wear part of it out, if you ruin part of it, break part of it, you might have to replace the whole thing. And you're seeing a little bit of wear right in here. But this is a solid one-piece manganese frog. Advantages and disadvantages. But isn't it neat that here on the ETR we can not look too far and find another part of the training that we're doing here. Boy, I do see so many things. Here is an example of switch ties, full length, and look at that one. Could there be a better example of a bad tie than that? It can't even hold the tie plate here. So that whole thing needs to come out in one piece, which is problematic because over there you start hitting as you're pulling it out. I did want to announce we bought a tie removing machine. Now it's older, smaller, and in need of repair, but that's what I enjoy doing and have some history of doing. So we're going to be rebuilding a piece of equipment that pulls out ties. We also bought a rail lifter and some handheld tamping equipment. So we've got some work to do and some tools to do it with. Well, we are going to kick the training up a notch today by introducing a live axle. We're going to kick it into the 5th dimension, and I'm not talking about the age of Aquarius. I'm talking about the age of Eterius, ETRIOUS. Well, our little live axle just made it all the way through that switch, even though the switch needs maintenance. But we're going to go on up and see how the axle does in frogs and switches that are poorly maintained. We're going to pick a switch and have a small derailment. You want to be able to look down the rail that you're on and see the flange traveling on the inside. So this is the flange of the wheel right here, and it is running on the inside of the rail. On this side, it's running on the inside of the rail and inside of the switch point. Now you might be asking, if this switch is so poorly maintained, why didn't it derail here? Well, this switch does have a lock on it right here. Now I don't mean a lock on the switch stand, I mean a clamp holding this closed. So we're not going to unbolt that. We're going to leave that in place, but let's get a good look at what happens here. Because there's no gap right here and the flange didn't get in it, we go on by, which is what you want. So let's go up to the next switch, see how we interface there. On the way, we're going to interact with a frog. Okay, now from class the other day, what did we learn? We learned you want the flange to be on the inside of the rail, so as you're looking down through here, you can see where you want to be, right through there to go on down to the south point. So here's where we interact with the guardrail, the guide rail. Now, if the wheel set is all the way over here, watch this hit. Oh, I just heard it hit. See the profile of the wheel. Now it's moving the axle over. Now this flange is ready to run right down through there. Now what do you see? If you're in the locomotive, you want to make sure that the flange is going to run on the inside. This one too is locked, so we should roll through there with no trouble. ETR tower, this is the 2021. We are southbound through halfway yard, headed toward the south point. There's an obstruction on the rail log. Frog is 9.5 feet long. And what's really interesting about this frog is this is called self-guarded. So as I stand here and we kind of look at the latter part of this turnout to the bakery curve, do you notice anything conspicuously missing? It's the guardrail. The guardrail that we're used to seeing on this rail right here, which keeps the axle that way, there isn't one. That's because this is a self-guarded frog. Now, this is the unique frog in that it's also the one-piece manganese, but it is self-guarded, meaning when the wheel comes down to that point right there, it's going to make sure that it's pushed over. This is going to make sure that it's over there. So let's roll through and see how it looks. What we're doing now is we're going to reset the gauge on the axle. This will simulate a freight car that's out in service. The wheels close together simulated wide gauge. This will get us back into the arena of proper gauge. 56.5 inches between the railhead. Okay, after a quick pit stop, we've re-gauged the axle. Let's go interface with the switch and the frog again. Well, now we have the wheels properly gauged. You normally think of gauging the rails, but because I was able to shim, I could move the wheels in and out and simulate some narrow gauge, wide gauge. We're back now to what it should be, which is 53 inches, maximum of 53.5 between the inner flange. So let's go see what happens now. It's gone. Oops, I gotta walk real gentle. Okay, it's encountering the first frog. The guide rail is going to do its job. Sure enough, I heard it hit. It ensured that the axle moved over and the flange followed the correct path. Okay, switch to Canada number 2, successful. Man, I gave it a pretty good push, and it must be a little bit downhill. But now it's coming to the switch that it might pick. Oh, crap. And, oh, derailment. Let's go up and see what happened. So this is the point where it's running up on top of the switch point, and I think is about to go down in. Yep, sure enough. Well, now the locomotive or the cars are on the ground going that way. This switch is all torn up. Now you're tearing up ties and continuing up that way till the rolling resistance stops you. So in review, that's where the wheel on our right picked the switch right here. The flange got up on top, rode along a little while, was forced that way down into the opening. It's an ugly thing, but it happens. We've cleaned up the derailment. Let's go on and see how our newly gauged wheel set does in the self-guarded frog. This is a one-piece frog. You do not need a guardrail. It's going to roll right through it, I can tell. Beautifully. Well, how many other channels give you this view? That's where the wheel, the side of the wheel, is interacting with the guardrail and making sure that as it comes forward, it stays on this side of the frog point. That's what it wants to be over here, but if it's too far that way, this shoves the wheel over, shoving the flange over and putting the flange right here in the flange way. This is the one-piece manganese self-guarded 9.5 foot long frog. Well, I'm going to clean all this up and see if I can package it into a form that's fun and educational. I do see this bad joint. Let's see what that sounds like or feels like. Hear and see it. Clunk, clunk, clunk. Well, another great day of learning on the ETR, using an axle to bring about the 5th dimension here in the age of Etarius.